A global climate change report released yesterday shows global warming is worse than expected. The report was prepared by over 200 scientists from over 60 countries. It paints a really grim picture of how we're destroying the planet we live on. As the planet warms, extreme weather will become more and more commonplace. Well, as I speak, in Greece and Turkey right now, wildfires ravaging parts of those countries. A few weeks ago, floods in parts of the UK. Let's discuss this now with two experts in the field of climatology and environmental sustainability at Wits University, joined by one of Africa's top climatologists, a lead author on this particular IPCC report, Professor Francois Engelbrecht, also climatologist and sustainability specialist, Professor Coleen Vogel. Thanks very much to both of you. Really fantastic to be able to talk to you both about such a critical issue. Professor Engelbrecht, I'm going to start with you because you were involved in this sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You were one of the many scientists who contributed. Tell us what your contribution was and your response on reading the final report, because it's really very alarming.
Good evening, Sally. Many thanks for having us. Yes, I was one of 230 scientists from 65 countries that over the last 3 years assessed all the available evidence of climate change to provide this updated assessment of where we stand today in terms of global warming and what we can expect in terms of climate change over the next several decades. Also, what can we still do about it? So when we look at mitigation scenarios in terms of mitigating carbon dioxide emissions, what are the possibilities we still have to work with in terms of trying to avoid these most dangerous global warming thresholds that can bring irreversible climate change to the planet?
Professor Vogel, I want to bring you in here. I know that you weren't a specific contributor on this report, but you have been involved in previous reports, so you've obviously read through this latest report. What do you think is the most urgent action that is required now?
Well, I think there are, two actions that are really critical, and that is to, make really significant cuts in our carbon activities, which much of the report focuses on. And obviously the third report, there are three reports that normally come out, and the third report that will come out as part of the IPCC will be more specific detail around what we call mitigation. So really trying to if you like, remove the culprits of why we are getting into these global warming situations and into these tipping points. That's the one thing. But I think the second thing that has come out quite clearly is that we have a very interesting window of opportunity now, that if we miss this window of doing something like the decarbonisation, like the just transitions, going off carbon, but doing it in a fair and equitable way, if we miss this opportunity coming up now as we go up into the COP, which is happening towards the end of the year, then we may really run into difficulties. And as you're seeing with your slides that you're showing, your images, the onus is now on governments, on civil society, on all of us to step up and really start to do the things that we need to do, and also making sure that we prepare communities so that we are more robust. And that means communities right down from the most vulnerable all the way across, to the government levels. It requires all of us to really have hands on deck.
Professor Engelbrecht, bringing you back in here, talk to us about this issue of the 1.5 degrees Celsius issue, because it's spoken about a lot, but it seems that we're getting to that warming point a lot quicker. What does it mean, this 1.5 degree marker? Why is it so critical?
Yes, the key finding of the report is that the best estimate we have of global warming right now is that it has reached a value of 1.1 degrees Celsius. That is now compared to a pre-industrial baseline, the natural temperature of the planet. So we are extremely close to exceeding the 1.5 degree Celsius threshold in global warming. And after that, quite possibly the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. Now, these two thresholds define dangerous and irreversible climate change. Somewhere between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, we may in fact irreversibly initiate the melting of the Greenland ice sheet and the West Antarctic ice sheet. Now, it will take millennia for the ice sheets to melt away completely, but if these two ice sheets melt, it commits future generations to sea level rise of about 12 meters. And then perhaps the most startling finding of this report is that it is now more likely than not that we will exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, even with our very best mitigation effort. The chances are still higher than 50% that we will not be able to avoid the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. If we immediately cut greenhouse gas emissions substantially, so we are speaking here about cutting emissions by half compared to the levels of the last few years by 2030. And if we follow that up and we completely eliminate emissions by 2050, so we achieve so-called net zero emissions, then we stand an excellent chance of restricting global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. And we may be fortunate that temperature will late in the century, in the presence of what we call carbon dioxide removal technologies, return to just below the 1.5 degrees Celsius level. But right now we are heading towards exceeding that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold somewhere in the early 2030s, the report has found.
Wow. And Professor Vogel, what does that mean? I mean, we're seeing the fires in Greece, and there are still people who say, oh, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. What do you say to those people?
Well, I think for many people, it's already happening. People are actually, for example, in really vulnerable areas, the flooding that we've seen in Germany, et cetera, et cetera. If we look back and we compare this to, previous records, many of the heating events, my colleague Francois Engelbrecht can talk to this, there have been marked changes, particularly in the warmest years on record, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there are people out there who still want to be firmly convinced, but I do think climate change is definitely an issue that has to be taken seriously. I think those who are standing outside of the circle and don't want to necessarily come in, it comes down to what's causing it. But I think this report is really now making it even firmer. I was involved in the previous two assessments, and we were saying, yes, we definitely, coming closer to certainty. Not that you can always be 100% certain, but, the science is really pointing us to some really good, reliable evidence. And this time round, as I'm sure my colleague will be mentioning soon, this is now really becoming a real issue. The evidence is getting stronger and stronger. The nuances are getting picked up.
So we can't live in denial. Sorry to jump in. We just can't live in denial any longer. I want to ask you a little bit to both of you, but I'll start with you, Professor Vogel. We've just seen Unit 4 at Medupi, the newly built coal-fired power station, blow up. And we are still so reliant on coal power in this country. We know that our government is making efforts to bring online alternative energy. But in the light of the report that we're seeing, do you think that our government, as expensive as it's going to be, should be making drastic decisions around things like Medupi, saying, no, let's not buy this new unit that we're now going to have to import and custom make. Let's make some big changes. Are we seeing enough action from government?
I think our government has always been, particularly in the climate change arena, one of the big leaders in this whole negotiations, particularly going into the COP. But I think the energy issue is an interesting one. Renewables are definitely becoming more affordable. Many companies, for example, are phasing out of coal. They're transitioning. I think the point is that it's a tricky discussion. There are some who say we need radical shifts, and there are others who are saying we have to go into a phased approach. You can't just pull off immediately because you will have, loss of livelihoods, loss of jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But the good thing is, to perhaps answer your question more firmly, is that there is a presidential commission on climate change, and these issues are being really strongly debated. The National Business Initiative, many people are looking at transition pathways. So, Sally, I think to assure the listeners that this has been taken very, very seriously, and there is pressure on government to think very hard about this.
And it is absolutely critical. I've got 30 seconds, Professor Engelbrecht. One thing that you want our viewers to take out of this discussion that we can do to make a difference?
Well, we can still avoid the most dangerous thresholds of global warming. Keep an eye on the upcoming 26th Conference of the Parties. There's a lot of hope that it will bring a new climate change pact that will bring together all the world's major economies. And if they make this decision in December to make the transition to renewables, the rest of the world will have to follow. And right now, there are signs that this is going to happen. It's the best hope that we've ever had of a big climate change negotiations meeting leading to worldwide climate action. So let's see what happens in November.
Well, it's certainly a time for change, and thank you both. Really do appreciate for both of you for unpacking such a critical and very urgent issue. That, of course, was Professor Francois Engelbrecht. He's one of the lead authors on this IPCC report. He's a climatologist and also, of course, a climatologist and sustainability specialist, Professor Coleen Vogel, both from Wits University.